Hey guys, welcome back to a Seller Session. Tim Jordan again returned to the show. How you doing, Tim?
I'm good. How are you?
All good, all good. So today we're going to have a chat about Latin America. So do you want to set the scene? Obviously, I don't think we've covered Latin America on the podcast too much. Although we've done a little bit of Mexico stuff, but nothing in depth. So what are we going to be covering today? Because you've got some history there. You've been doing it for a while now, and we're going to talk through some of the benefits of doing so. So
Yeah,
over to you.
it's just it's just been a hot topic. So when we were thinking about, prepping for the show and kind of considering what people are interested in hearing about, of course, Latin America popped into mind. And I was recently speaking to the head of Alibaba North America, and we were talking about this concept of like sourcing in North America being the US, Mexico, Central America, Canada. And what he was saying was that there's this misconception that the demand for North American sourcing and production is just in response to the logistical problems from China during COVID, right? So like the misconception is, oh, now that stuff's taking 2 months and the $20,000 container costs and all that stuff has just caused a temporary demand, a temporary increase in the excitement about sourcing in North America. And what he was saying, and he used a great illustration, he said, no, this fire has been burning a long time. COVID has just put gasoline on the fire, right? But it's not a new fire. It's not something new. And I was able to actually share with him my experience sourcing in Latin America that started about, I guess now it's been about 6 years ago. And maybe I was ahead of my time. Maybe I was over ambitious. Maybe I was stupid. I don't know. But it was an interesting experience. And basically what started that interest in Latin American sourcing for me was a combination of kind of emotion, but also seeing some cutting edge branding stuff. And I'll start off with the cutting edge branding. And it really started off with Tom shoes. All right, you're probably familiar with Tom shoes. It's a crappy pair of canvas shoes that people pay $60 a pair for, and they can't get enough of them. And the reason that Tom shoes are so popular is they essentially sell with a story. All right, so not storytelling, but story selling. And their whole concept is if you buy a pair, we give a pair. So if you buy a pair of their shoes, they give a pair to some underdeveloped community somewhere in the world, right? And people love that. So when I was getting into private label, and I was thinking, how on earth do I take a pretty typical product, maybe a saturated product, a commonplace product, and amplify it in its story selling ability to create demand, create traffic, to create increased perceived value, all of those things. And it took me back to my college years, actually. In my college years, I started traveling down to places like Haiti and Honduras, and I was doing basically relief work there. We would do medical clinics, we would do house building, we would do things like that. And I kind of fell in love with the area. I fell in love with the Caribbean. I fell in love with Central America. Don't speak any of the local languages at all. I am 100% gringo, no Espanol whatsoever. But I love the culture and I love the people. And I really felt like it was a shame that I hate to say America, that's another point of mine, but in the U.S., we are so blessed and we have so many opportunities, and it's only a few hundred miles away that some, countries are so underdeveloped and under maybe lacking in opportunities, right? I thought this would be really cool if maybe I could tie all this together, this entrepreneurism, this idea of story selling, and maybe utilize some of the less expensive labor that is in those countries in a fair and moral way, right? So I went down this mission, down this path of trying to figure out how to start sourcing in Latin America, specifically Central America. And it was interesting because no one had really talked about it before. In fact, that I'm host of the AMPM podcast, which Manny Coates used to run. Do you know how I met Manny?
No, go on.
You ever heard the story? I was cruising through a Facebook group one night at like 2 a.m.
Cruising
through a Facebook group.
Doesn't sound too right. Yeah. Go on.
No. Yeah. I was sliding into DMs. No, but I was perusing. I was browsing a Facebook group like 2 a.m. one morning.
Okay. And it
perusing,
rhymes.
That's a good word. And perusing and cruising. And I see this post from this guy that I don't know. His name is Manny Coates. I didn't recognize the name. He said, I'm trying to source like some sort of specific blanket from Latin America. And I had actually been dealing in Latin America for a little while and experimenting with it. So I made a post, I responded to him. We started chatting. He said, "What are you doing in Central America?" I said, "I have this vision of trying to source there. I have a small team put together in Guatemala." He says, "Man, we need to get you on my podcast." I said, "Oh, okay. You have a podcast. That's cool." Again, I didn't know who Manny was. So he invites me on this podcast, and we're supposed to talk about Latin America and sourcing in Latin America. Instead, we talk about keyword research. It was my first podcast I was ever a guest on. And wrap it 5 years later, I'm now the host of that same podcast, which was actually kind of cool. But anyways, yeah, very small world. So I was putting together this concept of sourcing in Latin America. I ended up building a team in Guatemala. I started talking to different people who were trying to source from the area and were very frustrated. I eventually started doing sourcing trips where I would take people down to Guatemala and we'd tour different cities and artisans and basically educational trips. So it's been interesting to see how the things that I learned then have been so impactful now, as essentially a large part of the e-commerce community is now looking at Latin America too, as if it's a new thing.
So let's get in some of the tactical stuff, points of differentiation from working with China itself, the benefits there, some of the side effects, meaning, do they have manpower for some of the production on, larger scale, Amazon brands and other brands, obviously, that sell brick and mortar and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's a lot to unpack. If I get off,
I know what I mean is if we go in that,
yeah. So
you can take one of those questions at a time. You don't have to attack it.
So let me break down Latin America a little bit, and let me give you what I understand to be the truth. Maybe if someone on here is actually Latin, they can correct me if I'm wrong. But I mentioned earlier that I hate using the term America. And when I say America, most people listening to this think that I'm talking about the United States of America. But what I was so bluntly taught on a trip to Latin America from someone down there is that we're all Americans. And I mean from the tip of Alaska to the very bottom of South America, right? We are all Americans. Mexico, people in Mexico are Americans because they're part of North America. Brazilians are Americans. So that's why I so loosely use the term gringo. It's not necessarily like a negative term, but it's really the only one word description for residents of the United States. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So when we look at the Americas and we talk about sourcing, I'm going to talk specifically about North America and Central America, right? So I'm talking about Mexico, Honduras, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, those areas, Panama.
Yeah. We keep yours.
Right. I'll stick to that area. And there's a huge difference between Central America. First, set up a company and started sourcing in disappear for a second. But when I first started sourcing in Honduras and Guatemala, we ran into a lot of problems, and it was very discouraging. We ran into issues like lack of communication, inability to actually find suppliers. We had local team members that literally spend days where they would jump in a truck, they would drive to some village and just beat on doors and ask around, "Hey, we're looking for someone that can produce this leather. We're looking for a tannery. We heard that you guys have great ceramic. Can you help us find a factory?" And eventually we would, but it was very slow going. Had a lot of issues with stability with infrastructure. There was one day I was sourcing a personal product from this really great wood artisan, this wood manufacturer producer, and called him up, placed another 1,000-unit order, and he said, "That's great. I need money to buy supplies." I said, "Okay." So I sent him like a deposit. He takes that money out of his bank into cash and he gives it to an employee and says, "Go down to the lumber yard, take my truck, go down to the lumber yard and fill the truck up with lumber for this order." And the guy never came back. So the supplier, the artisan, had to call me and say, "Look, man, I'm in trouble." He said, "I gave $1,000 to my employee who's worked for me for 15 years, but that $1,000 is going to feed their family for months. And he took my truck and he took the cash, and I don't know where he is. He's gone. I don't know what to do." And it's so bizarre to us that source in places like China to even think that little things like that can happen. Like your supplier calls you back and says, "Hey, I'm so broke, I can't buy the lumber for this. Can you forward me more of an advance payment?" Right? I had a client, not a client, a producer that was doing another wood project for me, and they had a very, very slow, hold on, my food's here. 1 sec.
Okay, while Tim is just getting his food, what he told me earlier on, he's ordered pancakes and syrup. He's got a full English breakfast. He's got coffee. He's got croissants. What else did he order as well? Just trying to think. I covered the pancakes there. I don't know if they're protein pancakes, but yeah, full English breakfast. Yeah. Hello, Tim. How we doing?
Sorry. Yeah, for everybody that's listening, I'm in a hotel in Vegas, and that was my room service, in my espresso. So anyways, I had this supplier that was just taking forever to make this product, just taking forever. And I'm like, man, this is a fairly simple product. So I sent one of my staff members down there to look, and a fairly simple machine, a drill press, right? A piece of machinery that I could buy in the States for $300. He was using one from like the 1970s, and it was duct taped together, and it was just awful. And she called me. She said, the reason it's taking so long is he's using this 40-year-old drill press that barely works and it's duct taped together. I said, let's buy him a new one, right? And she was able to go to town. She found one, sent me pictures of it. It was like a $400 machine, right? And it like tripled his speed. And we don't think about things like that when we're sourcing from somewhere that's more developed like China, because if they need the equipment, they just go get it. But literally, we were taking 3 times longer to produce this order in Guatemala because they couldn't afford a $400 drill press. So yeah, I can keep telling you struggles, but the main point is I got very discouraged, and I thought there is no way we can scale up. There's no way that we can do this on a large scale. There's no way that we can increase the volume substantially for the community in whole. Because, my intention was, let's figure out how to do this, and we'll connect these small and medium-sized e-commerce businesses with the small and medium-sized manufacturers, right? Like, that's great. Let's empower everybody. Let's have this win for everybody. But I got really discouraged. So I started learning about manufacturing capabilities within Latin America, specifically Central America and Mexico. And that's when I started looking more to Mexico. And at first, I was hesitant to start working in Mexico because a lot of this ambition of mine was philanthropic. And at the time, we were watching the news, especially here in the US, of the Trump border wall, right? You've got migrant caravans from Honduras and Guatemala that, thousands of people are walking. We had migrant caravans even from South America, from places like Venezuela, and they're crossing through Panama, and they're trying to get up through Mexico and into the US. And I had a really big problem with that. And I wasn't, beating the Trump drums of build a wall, keep everybody out of the US. That wasn't my thought. My thought was, if we have these very, very severely impoverished and underdeveloped countries, the worst thing in the world that can happen for them is some of the best, some of the most ambitious, some of the most brave, some of the most healthy residents picking up and walking out of their country. Like, those are the people we need to stay there and help develop everything, right? So my mission was to, maybe on a very, very tiny scale, was to let entrepreneurism start bringing jobs and start bringing some money and some stability to the area, because I believe that that's the way that you build up an economy, and that's the way you build up an underdeveloped nation. So anyways, I was very discouraged. I really wanted to start sourcing in Central America specifically for that reason. But I realized that Mexico was going to have to be a big piece of this. And at first I was hesitant because I thought, Mexico is, it's not a third world country, right? They're a little bit better off. They have a lot more infrastructure. But I started learning. So all this wrapping around to your question of like, what does the landscape look like for sourcing and manufacturing? So Mexico has actually been a manufacturing hub for a long time. All right, for 30 or 40 years at least. But the type of manufacturing that has traditionally been done does not do us much good at all as e-commerce sellers. And the reason is the manufacturing is typically on a very large scale. It's more industrial. So if you look at like Ford Motor Company or Chrysler, they build their engines and transmissions for their cars in Mexico, right? So like really big stuff. So essentially these investments from specifically US companies as part of the initiative through the North American Free Trade Agreement, which was basically a broker deal between Latin America and the US, where things could be imported basically duty free, right? So the companies that had a lot of money like Ford or Chrysler were investing in building giant factories and training their staff and sending engineers down and building car engines. Well, that doesn't do us any good. Like, I could find a factory that makes a car engine, but they're not going to make me 1,000 fidget spinners, right? That doesn't work. So the struggle with Mexico was not that manufacturing wasn't being done. The struggle was the small manufacturers, all right? Because we as e-commerce sellers are small businesses typically. And we're placing orders of 1,500 units or 2,000 units or 1,000 units typically, and they're highly customized, and we're a complete pain in the butt to work with. Because it was finding
Keep losing you there, Tim. It was dead silence there. I was waiting for you to come back, but I've I can just see you in a freeze frame at the moment. I'll give you a few more seconds. We'll wait for Tim to come back online. It looks like he's stuck there. He's coming in on a different camera.
I don't know what happened there. So,
well, look, can you see yourself above?
Oh, that is super bizarre.
Yes, he got stuck. Okay, I'll edit that out for the podcast. But
so,
yeah.
So anyways, what was happening was we were needing to find the small and medium-sized factories that wanted to work with our small and medium-sized brands. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Like we had to match correctly. Like our needs, our wants, our ambitions, our capabilities needed to match. Well, that's difficult because there is no Alibaba essentially in Latin America.
Tim, you're really badly the cutting out. There's massive gaps as you've came back on. Is it only Wi-Fi in the hotel?
Are no big trade.
Can you move where you're placed at all? Because it's really bad. Like
there's no ASD, there's no Canton Fair, and
yeah. Okay, back again. Yeah.
Blame it on the Vegas internet, man. I don't know what to tell you. It's awful.
1 second. Let's get you off the screen. Okay. Yeah.
So hopefully it'll hold strong. So trying to find these small and medium-sized businesses to work with the small and medium-sized manufacturers struggle because we don't have those ways to connect. We don't have the, like I said, the lists. We don't have the directories. So the only way that we started finding some success was through personal relationships, and it's slow. It takes a long time. You have to meet somebody who introduces you to somebody who introduces you to somebody else. You have to jump on a plane and go meet this person, find out this person isn't perfect, but they know this person. Then if you drive to this other town, they also have this person. And what we found is that there is actually a massive, massive ability to produce in Mexico for e-commerce sellers. The problem was we just didn't know how to match everybody together. And it was super encouraging because in Mexico, a lot of these manufacturers had a little more capability. They had a little bit more money. They had a little bit more stability. They had a little bit more experience. So where I spent potentially years being frustrated, thinking like, man, this sourcing in Latin America thing is tough. It's never going to work. I'm beating my head against the wall. It's a lost cause. What I realized was I just had to go about it the wrong way for a little while until I was able to make enough contacts and get enough education and figure it out. And now it's like I'm looking into this tunnel of blinding white light of excitement because I can see the future, right? Like I can see that it's not that manufacturing isn't possible. It's that the manufacturers are begging to find us and we're begging to find them. We just didn't have the conduit to do that. We just didn't have a way where we could actually meet up and find parity between each other. And it's really, really cool.
Cool. And then what's been the next steps from that? Once you found the pocket in terms of development that you can scale and stuff like that, where is the next steps come in to really kind of put that into action?
Actually set expectations correctly of what you can source. Okay. Now, I love sourcing in places like Latin America. I love sourcing in places like India. But the truth is, neither of those are ever going to replace China, or at least not in the next 30 years. It's not going to happen. China has spent 150 years becoming the manufacturer of the world, right? When we source from China, we know what to expect. It's fast, it's good. The technology is great. Every factory in China is full of like legit stamped engineers. They're just ahead of the game. So there are some things that we will never, I won't say never, but for decades, probably not be able to outsource efficiently elsewhere in large scale. But there are things that are easier to produce that are more likely to scale up quickly in these alternative sourcing areas, whether it's Vietnam or India or Latin America. So the things that I had the first success with were things like wood, leather, ceramic, coffee, and other agricultural items. A lot of textiles, specifically cotton. I can get really nice, like organic grown, cotton all over Latin America. That's very, very easy. And if you think about just the categories of those wood, leather, ceramics, and cotton, and textiles, there's like millions of products to be manufactured. So that's where I got my feet wet. Now, when we started researching more in Mexico, we started finding more industrially produced products are actually easy to find. So plastics, latexes, silicones. We can find factories that can do injection molding and reverse molding, and we can do a lot of synthetic materials like fiberglass, resins, and carbon fiber. That stuff's coming in hot right now. So we're still a long ways away, I think, from like electronics and heavily machined items. If I were to take apart my laptop, you would find all sorts of stamped and CNC'd machine metal parts. That's not something that's very easily replicatable in a place like Latin America, but there's still millions of products that are. We have people that I know that are making anything from foldable beach chairs to BPA-free water bottles to some of the best leather bags and passport holders you've ever seen. There's basically an unending opportunity of products as long as we stick within the categories that are going to be a strength in those areas. Yeah. I know a lot of people that tried to source, like, let's say plastics or latexes or silicones in places like Mexico a few years ago, and they really struggled. They're like, well, this is a waste of time. Well, what they don't understand is that Mexico is scaling up fast. If we think about not just the COVID thing, but before that, think about the Trump tariffs and the Trump duties. There was already a lot of interest in how do we manufacture outside of China. And I'm talking about Chinese factories thinking, how do we manufacture outside of China so that we can get our products into places like the US without 100% anti-dumping duties, right? So for about 5 years, a lot of the large manufacturers in places like Taiwan and China and South Korea have actually been investing in Mexico. They've been investing in infrastructure. They've putting together manufacturers. They've been putting together teams. They've been doing education. They've been putting engineers in those areas. They've been investing money. So what wasn't possible even as few as 3 or 4 years ago is now becoming highly possible to do because those best manufacturers in the world are now investing in Mexico, right? They're moving their operations there. They're moving their capabilities and their infrastructure there. So if any of you are listening and like, Tim's an idiot, I tried this plastic water bottle thing or this, whatever it was 3 or 4 years ago, it wasn't possible. Give it another shot because the landscape has dramatically and radically changed just in the past few years.
Cool. In terms of lead times and stuff like that and scalability, is there anything to watch out for there? And do you want to go over some types of products that are key for manufacturing? I know you said outside electronics and stuff like that, but give some examples of really good areas like categories.
Yeah, so categories, I talked about materials. Categories, we're seeing a lot of sports. We're seeing a lot of home decor. We're seeing a lot of personal accessories. We're seeing a lot of fashion. We're seeing a lot of industrial. We are seeing a lot of agricultural products, but I don't necessarily suggest it because there are some difficulties. So that could be anything from dried eucalyptus leaves, which are a popular hot item on Amazon right now, to white sage, right? Sage bundles for doing the Screebowl thing, right? But agriculture is a little bit tough. So even though it's working well, I don't always endorse it. We're also seeing a lot of things like kitchen products. If they are made of stamped metal, not CNC'd metal, Let's see what else. A lot of clothing, right? And I know that clothing isn't always a great thing for typical private label Amazon sellers, but a lot of accessories are. And we're seeing a lot of really cool like blends of materials. So we're seeing a lot of blends of leathers with textiles and things like that. So literally millions of different product opportunities as long as you stick within those categories.
Right. And in terms of generalization of like lead times and stuff, and what about in terms of access to, obviously you do the sourcing over there, but there are a plethora of sourcing agents. What about inspection companies and stuff like that?
Yeah. And I will say, I don't offer sourcing as a service. That's not something I do. I'm not a sourcing agent. I just like to connect people, but lead times is kind of like asking how long a piece of string is.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it varies, you know, there's no specific answer. I will say that what I have found to be the typical case in Latin America is that the ramp up period is slower than say China. The ramp up period being, let's find a manufacturer, let's get our samples, let's get our prototypes, let's negotiate this out, just because the pace is a little bit slower, but also these manufacturers are less accustomed to those types of inquiries. You know, we can fire off something on Alibaba or call a Chinese sourcing agent, and they know exactly what we're going to ask, and know exactly what we're going to want. They already have the answers to our questions before we ask them. We're having to educate a lot of the manufacturers, specifically in Mexico, for the type of operations that we're going to want to proceed with, right? As long as you have the patience to go through that, one, let me say this, that's not discouraging to me, that's encouraging, because if it were super easy, everybody would do it. So if I'll take the time to spend 2 or 3 months tracking down a great supplier for a product and going through the slow sample process and the slow prototype process, my potential competitors may not want to do that. So it creates a moat, a barrier of entry around my brand or my niche or my product that most other people aren't going to want to go through and compete with. So I actually love that it's a little bit slower. Once we actually get things cranking up, manufacturing time doesn't seem to be that much different than what we're used to. You know, if they can get materials. Now, one caveat is materials, because there are some things that are just not made in Mexico right now. So for example, if I'm producing a really nice leather duffel bag, the hardware for that duffel bag is still coming from China. So the leather will be locally sourced, it'll be manufactured, it'll be produced, it'll be tanned, it'll be assembled. But the buttons, the snaps, and the zippers are still going to come from China. So we are seeing a few occasions where some of those accessory items, those components that are Chinese manufactured, they may have to wait for those to come in, or they may be able to, you know, buy them locally from a wholesale, but there may be a little hiccup there. Excluding that, though, typical lead times are kind of what we're used to, you know, 30 days, 40 days, things like that. The real big saving is shipping.
That's what I was going to say.
Cost,
lead time on the shipping as well.
Yeah. Lead time on the shipping. So some of the most heavily utilized manufacturing areas in Mexico, like Monterrey and Guadalajara, man, I can load up an 18-wheeler truck full of stuff and I can have it to Texas in 48 hours. I can have it to my fulfillment center in Dallas in 48 hours. Wow. It is fast. And a lot of the things that we're used to with the really stringent inspections, the duty assessments, all those things coming from Asia, we're not seeing that. They drive that stuff across the border. A lot of the North American Free Trade Agreement has changed a little bit, but generally speaking, you can get almost anything in that's been manufactured in Mexico for nearly free. Yeah. Right. The things that are 110% duties in China might be 2% duty or free coming out of Mexico, which is nice. If there is a product that specifically has like components from Mexico or components from China, and I might take a little.
We're getting another technical issue with the internet there, mate. Do you want to drop back out and come back in?
The actual apples to apples.
Do you want to drop back in if you can? There we go. Did it again.
I'm back. Did it again. It's his internet here. So if you're comparing a nice leather duffel bag made, it might be a little bit less expensive from China. In fact, it probably will. if you're just talking about the production cost, because a lot of the materials are cheaper in China. Labor is still slightly cheaper in China. But when you add the shipping costs and the import duties, it becomes significantly less expensive to source from Mexico. Plus, you can add in some perceived value, because if I'm producing a nice leather duffel bag and I'm selling on Amazon US, I'll actually advertise that made in the Americas or made in Mexico as opposed to made in China, which increases the perceived value. So not only is it less expensive to actually source and land an FBA when you consider duties and shipping, but also is a higher perceived value because it's not sourced in China. I'm not beating up on China. I'm not saying China makes a bunch of crap, but we all know that there is a higher perceived value when it's produced somewhere else typically.
Yeah. In terms of summarizing, because the technical issues with you dropping out, is there anything else we need to cover here before we summarize overall? And you're frozen again. All right, you might need to drop back in again. Just messaging you now. Okay, you back?
I'm back. Oh my gosh. Oh, how annoying. Okay.
So let's do a quick summary. Yep. Because, you've still got the technical issues. For those listening back now through the live, what I'll do is I'll edit it and be out on the podcast tomorrow if you feel like you've missed any areas. So, quick summary at the end, and then we'll shoot off because of the hotel internet.
Yeah, so quick summary is there's a lot of potential in Latin America. It's not necessarily easy. You have to find the right connections. You have to find the right sources. You have to be educated. You might have to educate your manufacturers. But when we think about playing long ball, like creating a brand, creating a business that's sustainable and long term, those investments doesn't, you end up with that ability to story sell, like we talked about the Tom shoes. You end up with the ability to have maybe closer relationships with your manufacturers, because I from the US can jump on a plane in 2 hours, be in Mexico City, right? I can meet my manufacturers faster. I can help potentially a region of the world that I actually feel personally connected with, like that I want to help establish more manufacturing and more jobs there. And it's just fun.
Yeah.
Right. Like business should be fun. We have to make money. We have to be profitable, but being able to explore these new opportunities, whether it's through sourcing or relationships or
Cool. I think we're going to have to keep cutting out, Tim. There's a lot of editing to do here. Let's wrap it here. What's the best way that people can reach you? You've got some impressive faces on this.
It's
on this cast. Okay. Well, look, what I'm going to do is I'll cut the live here, and then we'll make some edits, and people that are listening to the playback or can listen to the playback tomorrow, if that's okay. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I'll be back here again tomorrow. Take care of yourself and your family. Much love, and I'll see you soon.